We should follow the example of a North Miami woman named Desaline Victor. When Desaline arrived at her polling place, she was told the wait to vote might be 6 hours. As time ticked by, her concern was not with her tired body or aching feet, but whether folks like her would get to have their say. Hour after hour, a throng of people stayed in line to support her. Because Desaline is 102 years old. And they erupted in cheers when she finally put on a sticker that read, "I voted."
Wow, we're back at the State of the Union this year. The president promised to do something about a voting system that forces some people to wait in line for hours just to cast their vote. It's a problem that disproportionately affects African Americans, we know now, who, according to a recent MIT study, wait an average of an additional 7 minutes more than whites do to cast a vote. But in some cases, those waits are much, much longer, as we've learned. In Florida, for example, the Saturday before the election, the reports of people waiting up to 7 hours there. And this week, the president followed through on his promise to do something about it. He set up a bipartisan commission tasked with improving access to the polls. While he fights to improve access, there are still Republicans out there trying to make it more difficult to vote. And that's exactly what's happening in North Carolina right now, where 2 bills are now working their way through the legislature that would cut back on early voting. Will they get away with it? Judith Browne Dianis is co-director of the civil rights group, The Advancement Project, and Michael Waldman is president of the Brennan Group for Justice, which tracks voter suppression efforts. So both of you, I'm going to lay back here and learn, okay? And I think Judith and Michael, I want to tell you, in the last election cycle, we talked about dozens of states playing games like in Pennsylvania and Florida, right. Souls to the polls, the Sunday closings. Now we find out that North Carolina is doing exactly what we pinpointed as a particular problem, screwing black voters out of a habit they had. They find out that the blacks like to vote on Sundays from church. Let's cut that down. And they're openly doing it.
Right. That's right. That's because the politics of North Carolina have changed. You had Republican control of the legislature. Now you have Republican control of the governor's house. And so the equation has changed. So now partisan efforts get to change the way people vote to make it harder for those that they don't want to vote. So we know.
So you get it through.
Right. That's right. So early voting, they will cut back. They're also trying to eliminate same-day registration, which more than 250,000 people registered through same-day registration in 2008, and we know that the margin of victory was a little over 17,000.
So it's people that hadn't voted in a while, because you keep your registration, don't you, if you vote?
Right, exactly. And so it actually helps with people who move. You can just go register again, and it's the easy thing to do. Mm-hmm.
Show up. Anyway, one of the Republican-sponsored bills in North Carolina wants to cut the early voting period by a week. Another bill goes even further. It would outlaw early voting on Sunday before the election. Those efforts would disproportionately hurt African Americans, according to statistics from the group Democracy North Carolina. Anyway, 70% of African American voters in 2012 cast an early ballot. You like that? That's a great statistic. 70% of black voters vote before Election Day. Among all voters, that figure was just 56%, although that's growing. And when it comes to Sunday voting, many African American churches take part in what's called Souls to Polls voting drives. Last year, African Americans cast an astounding 39% of votes on Sunday, even though they make up only 22% of the registered voters in the state. So we're learning a lot here. Michael, your thoughts and your study of this. I know it's great you're doing this.
Well, what a coincidence that happens to be the day that gets cut off in early voting, right? This is really interesting because, as you know, there was a real effort in the last election. 19 states passed 25 separate laws to make it harder for people to vote. Most of those worst laws were blocked by the courts or by the Justice Department, and there was a real backlash. So now you're starting to see something of a split personality, an internal debate among Republicans pushing this. In Florida, Governor Scott, who had pushed basically the same exact ideas, is now doing backflips to say how much he supports early voting. Because they believe, and it's
he's
probably
fighting for
true.
His life down there because the guy's so detested in Florida.
Because
he's got to do something.
Republicans got caught in those lines, and Republicans are upset because they went out to early vote, and they're saying, "Why did you stand against it?" But important in Florida is that they're not trying to give back all of the early voting days, so they're still cutting it.
Are you saying that some of the Republicans were in line too? They were held up?
Yes, they were in line too.
That's the thing, is early voting and these other voting issues, they really ought not be partisan. And in the past, they didn't used to be partisan. Early voting was not something that supposedly favored one party or another. And it shouldn't matter what party you're in. It shouldn't matter what state you're in. That's why whatever happens with this presidential commission, which is just going to be making recommendations to local and state officials, there's really no substitute, I think, for minimum national standards set by Congress for early voting, registration, of things like that.
Let's go back to what's sneaky and looks sneaky. It seems to me in baseball, I'm not a baseball expert, but every time they start playing around with the strike zone, there's too many home runs, not enough home runs, right? So they adjust it.
Right.
Shouldn't we be suspicious of any law change about voting?
Yes, we should.
Because we wonder, what do they want to change? They want to change the results.
Right. And they don't have really good reasons. There's no compelling reasons for this. All we know is that at the end of the day, the American public wants it to be easier to vote. They want free, fair, and accessible elections, but Republicans, time after time, they line up to make it harder to vote. In Virginia, Governor McDonnell ready to sign off on a voter ID law that makes it harder to vote. Yeah. And so, yes, the closer they get to perhaps winning, they want to take over.
Last word, Mike.
I would say that I think there's a good record that when this country, which it has over time, has expanded the ability to vote, has made it easier to vote, we've never regretted it. It hasn't led to problems. It's only led to a stronger country. But it should be done carefully and in a way with both parties. But cutting back, it smells bad. It really does.
Okay, Mike, I think I'll be seeing you at my house soon. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us. Mike Waldman has done a great time in his second career after being a speechwriter for President Clinton. Anyway, Judith, thank you so much. Happy Easter, both of you. We'll be right back. You're watching Hardball, Place for Politics.